The Russia-Ukraine situation continues to escalate as Russia added more force capability and announced today a flurry of military drills across its territory after U.S. troops were placed on high alert. Yesterday, President Biden spoke with a range of European leaders for more than an hour, trying to keep the alliance together as fears mounted over an attack that U.S. officials say could happen at any time.
The United States has taken steps to heighten the readiness of its forces at home and abroad so that they are prepared to respond to a range of contingencies, including support to the NATO response force if it is activated.
Joining me now to talk about the latest news on the escalating Russia-Ukraine situation is U.S. Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, who is a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and who recently visited Ukraine and met with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Senator, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be back. Thank you, Tony.
Well, let's first talk about your visits, or your visit. But I want to, before we get to that, the latest on this unfolding situation.
Well, it's really kind of remarkable. I'm having a little bit of a hard time keeping up, as I think a lot of both allies and adversaries probably are, with our president's actions. This movement with 8,500 troops, putting them in a high alert, seems a little bit like just trying to make up for calling, saying that if it's a minor incursion, we may just want to talk about it. It just seems like he's always fumbling around and sending chaotic signals, which I think are complicating matters a little bit. And I'm sure that his trying to keep the NATO coalition together and the alliance together is part of the challenge, obviously, that he has, but isn't helped by these confusing signals that he sends.
Now, some of our NATO allies in Europe are not as concerned about the Russian activity on the Ukrainian border as Americans are.
Yeah, it's interesting. The stability of Europe, of course, is of vital importance to America and Americans, but you'd think it'd be even of greater importance to Europe. And it probably is, but I do worry a little bit that it's not as, shall we say, unified as we had hoped. There are a number, don't get me wrong, there are a number of European allies, Britain, for example, and certainly the Eastern Bloc states that are concerned about it, and they're very involved in the alliance. Germany, of course, has been a bit of a complicator. I don't think it's unusual to have an outlier, but an outlier that's as big and important in Europe as Germany is, of course, is a bit of a problem. But I consider that more of them being on the wrong side of this than anything else.
Well, one of the tools that the president spoke about early on last week and before was the diplomatic use of sanctions. But that runs into problems with some of our European NATO allies because sanctions on Russia could affect their economy.
So interesting point, Tony, and this is why we have to always be careful with economic sanctions, because there is splashback. You might recall that early on in the Trump administration, Congress passed a series of sanctions on Russia that he reluctantly signed. Now, I actually went to Kazakhstan shortly after that, and part of my mission there was to talk to the media and talk to the Kazakh leaders about the administration's interest in making sure that the implementation of those sanctions didn't harm our allies, mainly them. So you're exactly right, and they're right to be concerned, which is why these kinds of things have to be negotiated far in advance. You have to have standing with your allies so that you can lead, and we've lost some of that standing in recent months and in the last year. And so building that alliance under an umbrella that makes sense, that punishes the people that need to be punished without punishing the region, allies, for that matter, Tony, Americans. Europe, an unstable Europe is a problem for all of us. So you have to balance all of those things. I don't think the president has done a particularly good job of it. Right now, Congress is looking at a couple of packages, as you know, including a Menendez package, a Risch package. I think we need to have a bipartisan package that meets, the moment. And but at the same time, you can't leave your European allies out in the cold.
So, Senator Cramer, let's talk about that bipartisan approach, because you met with President Zelensky there in Ukraine, and it was a bipartisan codel members of both parties going there to meet. Tell us about that trip and your meeting with the president.
Well, it was an important trip because we were there to do a couple of things. First of all, of course, to get information on the ground, and we did. And we had very important briefings with our State Department as well as with Ukraine leaders. But also, and probably more importantly, was to relay a unified voice from Congress itself. Republicans, Democrats, there are 4 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and we were well briefed by the administration. We went with the administration's blessing, trying to be helpful in their negotiations and give them the best hand possible. And I think to that end, we were pretty successful that the Ukrainian leaders, including President Zelensky, saw this unified front. I think it gave him a sense of confidence. Now, that said, he expressed his dismay, as did all of their leaders. We met with their energy minister, a foreign affairs minister, obviously, as well as the interior minister, which oversees their militias, their National Guard, police forces, things like that. They all expressed concern about the Nord Stream 2 allowing getting that green light to be built. And now in some of the sanctions talk, as you know, we failed. We only got 55 votes on the Ted Cruz sanctions, Nord Stream 2 sanctions, which would have implemented those sanctions immediately on the builders of Nord Stream 2. Democratic
just for our listeners'
pipeline.
benefit. Yeah, the gas pipeline. But
the gas pipeline
again,
to Germany.
That has complications with Germany.
It does, which is part of why I suspect part of why Germany's been so difficult to work with. On the other hand, this is a failure on a couple of parts. It's short-sighted on Germany's part to allow a pipeline that really gives Vladimir Putin more leverage over not just Germany, but all of Europe when it comes to natural gas and energy. I always say, coming from an energy producing state, energy security is national security. To make Europe more captive to Vladimir Putin is really short-sighted. It may seem like a good idea in the short run, but not in the long run.
But we've facilitated that with our own policy in this administration because we were energy independent. In fact, we were exporting for the first time in decades up until this administration came in.
Yeah, so President Trump used to like to say, and I appreciate so much, we were energy dominant. Independence was a goal. We achieved the dominance to the point of energy security. And by the way, Tony, a lot of people like to brag about natural gas as a bridge fuel for cleaner energy. Well, the reality is it is, but Vladimir Putin's natural gas, when you consider the life cycle of it, which is everything from the discovery and production and then the transportation and refinement, is 41% greater in greenhouse gas emissions than American natural gas that would be liquefied and sent by ship. In other words, we have an American solution to this situation that Germany and the rest of Europe finds. And this is, by the way, why the European Union, one of the reasons, the European Union Parliament overwhelmingly opposes the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's largely a German initiative that has allowed this pipeline to be built. But we as Americans to produce cleaner natural gas, we need to be more actively involved in a geopolitical solution, trade solution that provides, this security that we all seek. And we haven't made that case.
You cannot decouple energy policy with national security. You can't. You can't
Absolutely.
do it. So before we run out of time, Senator Cramer, quickly, your meeting with President Biden as you briefed him on the trip.
Well, it was a good meeting. I mean, it was the 7 of us and the president for about an hour. It was via video conference or Zoom, I think. And he was pretty engaged, and he pushed back on me when I said I frankly think that we've handed Vladimir Putin a weapon with Nord Stream 2. He pushed back and said, "Hey, listen, now that it's built, remember that energy revenue is a very important thing to him, and so that becomes leverage for us." It's a plausible argument. I still think it's a flawed argument. I don't think it should have ever been built. The problem is now it becomes a negotiating tool rather than, because this is a bad pipeline, no matter what, whether we're trying to fend off the Russians or not. So we had a good discussion. I felt like we were all in sync, that we had a pretty unified voice. But then later that day, he held this 2-hour news conference where he suggested that a minor incursion might not require much of a response. And of course, that required a lot of cleanup.
Yes, a major cleanup. So
yes, it did. Yeah.
Senator Cramer, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Always my pleasure, Tony. Thanks for the opportunity.